So it is 7 o'clock, so we will officially start our story swap meeting. I don't think it's necessary for us to introduce ourselves to each other. This is a rather small meeting. We all know each other. Hopefully Ron Evans will join us in a little bit, but I don't know of anybody else that responded that I would be expecting. So Walter, do you want to go ahead and tell your story?
I'll give it a shot. This is a pretty difficult story for me for a number of reasons. It has a kind of complex plot, and also it's based on a play and not a story. So a play, of course, is entirely told through dialogue, and a storytelling is a narrative. It was based on a play written in 1880 by the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen. And as I read the play over again, I read it in college, and then I remembered it, and I read it over again. There's only one copy of it in the entire Riverside County library system. I had to order it from out in the desert someplace. As I read the play, I noticed similarities in the plot with two major movies that have been made. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but afterwards, if you want to take a guess at what I'm thinking, I'd be interested to see what you think. The play is called An Enemy of the People. It's a story about a small town in Norway, and also the story of two brothers. The older brother, David Stockman, and his younger brother, Peter Stockman. They had been born in a privileged situation. They were a prominent family. They were both pretty much used to getting things done their own way. They were both quite intelligent and stubborn. But other than that, their personalities were completely different. David was an idealist. He was a principle fighter. Even as a child, he would argue for hours about anything and be uncompromising in his position. He also had the welfare of others always in mind. When he was old enough, he went to the big city, got his degree at the university, and became a medical doctor, opened a practice, and was quite successful. He was well respected and known to be a man of his word. His brother Peter did not go to college and had a completely different perspective on life. He was the kind of person who could size you up. He was very perceptive in people's, what would make people motivated, what people wanted to hear. And he was a very successful businessman. He was not an idealist. He was a practical man. And that's what he thought of himself as, a practical man. Well, when their father died, he took over his father's business and then acquired quite a number of other ones. In addition to that, he ran for office and eventually became the mayor of his little town. Now, both of them had their families, and when they were middle-aged, the town came upon some very hard times. There was a tannery outside of town that was the biggest employer of the area, and it went out of business. And that created quite a number of hardships for the people of the town. A lot of people were out of work. But the mayor, Peter, had an idea. It turns out that in the 1880s, it was very popular to go to a place where you could go to a spa and what they called take the water. That included bathing and it included drinking water. So it was considered to be very healthy and curative. So he had the idea that they could turn the town into a tourist attraction by building a kind of spa, public bath, that would attract lots of visitors. So the town got together their money and their whatever resources they could muster, manpower, and they dug a trench to the nearest water supply. They could not use the city water because it was just enough for the city. David Stockman, the doctor, actually quit his practice and came to live in his hometown in order to help supervise the construction of this public bath. He insisted on the strictest standards of sanitation, and that involved using lots of water that he insisted they flush out the system every single day so that the water would be clean and as pure as possible. The town built, remodeled a facility in town and made a beautiful, very attractive spa for people. They dug a trench and laid pipe to a nearby lake and accessed the water. And that year was the best year that they'd had in quite a long time. Lots of people came to visit. Shopkeepers were happy. Hotel people were happy. Everyone was happy, except for Dr. Stockman. Dr. Stockman was worried. He would pace up and down. He had a permanent frown on his face. He didn't say anything, not even to his wife, but something was troubling him. He was seen after hours at the spa, sort of prowling around, looking at things, and no one knew exactly what he was up to. And then he would wait for the mail every day. When the mail came, he would search through the letters and then put them down. Obviously, he was waiting for something. Finally, the day came where the letter he was waiting for arrived. He opened it up and read it, and he said, "I knew it. I knew it." And he had a big smile on his face. He's announced to his wife that evening they were going to have a plan for a dinner the next day, and they were going to invite everyone in town of the importance, the mayor, the city engineer, and all the city council. He had an important announcement to make. So they all arrived, they had a wonderful dinner, and after dinner, he told them the real purpose of his meeting. He said that he had been very concerned that in his medical practice, he had observed a lot of strange illnesses, fevers, rashes, dysentery of all sorts. And the first thing that he noticed was they were only visitors. And his first thought was, these people are bringing disease into our town. But then he thought, that just doesn't quite make sense that many people would be that sick. So he went to the spa and he took samples of the water and he sent it off to a laboratory. And the results came back and said that the water was heavily contaminated. He suspected that the source of the contamination was actually the tannery, which had leaked its refuse into the lake that they were using for the water that people were bathing in and drinking. So he proposed that they solve the problem. It must be solved immediately. They would have to close the spa and put in a line of pipes to a better source of water, a little bit farther away, but known to be very pure. He naively expected the city council and the mayor to praise him for having found a problem and a solution. But instead, they were very suspicious. One person said, "You don't really expect us to believe this tale of yours, do you? Little invisible animals in the water, thousands of them, and they're making people sick." And you have to understand that in 1880, not everyone believed in the germ theory of disease. So some people were unconvinced that there was anything wrong with the water at all. So he said that he would publish a letter in the newspaper explaining to the town what the problem was, and he was confident that people had enough common sense that they would go with his plan of closing it down and rebuilding it to have pure water. The editor of the newspaper agreed that it would be a great idea. That was his duty to tell people what was wrong. But after the meeting broke up, his brother, the mayor, went to the editor of the paper and said, I don't think you really want to do that. You see, I think my brother is overreacting, and I think he's been misinformed. I think that he has the best of intentions, but imagine what would happen if we close down the spa. A lot of people will be out of work, and they will probably be quite angry with you because you published the bad news. You might lose a lot of subscribers. You might lose a lot of advertising. Well, that changed the editor's mind. He decided not to publish the letter of Dr. Stockman. But they did publish a notice that they would have a public meeting, a town meeting. So at the town meeting, there was a large crowd of people. And what Dr. Stockman did not know is that the town council had gone around and spread the word about this meeting and what Dr. Stockman was going to say. And the people who owned the restaurants and the hotels and people who worked at the spa were certainly going to be there to speak up. When the doctor came to speak, he explained the problem with the water and how it had been polluted by the tannery and what he proposed to do to fix it. And the town was even more outraged than the city council. They screamed that they were going to starve, that they could not take days off or a year off of no work. And Dr. Stockman said, you have to take the long view, not the short view. In the short term, yes, it will be painful for us, but in the long term, we cannot be poisoning people. People are coming to us to be healed. Many of them are already sick. It would be unconscionable for us to give them poisoned water to make them even sicker and take their money to do it. But the people were convinced that this was a overreaction, that they had already spent a lot of money and a lot of effort, and they had a good year this year. They felt rather prosperous, and they saw no need to undo what they had done and then rebuild at further expense, more pipe to another source. Dr. Stockman was getting impatient. He was very angry. And he said that the people in the city council are not serving you well. They should not be on the city council. They should be removed. Well, at that point, his brother, the mayor, hit his gavel upon the table. And for the first time, the crowd was really quiet and listening. And he said, it seems to me that the good doctor, my brother, is not interested in clean water. He's interested in a revolution. And at that, the crowd roared. Yes, the doctor, he is our enemy. He is an enemy of the people. And at that point, nothing else could be heard. The crowd was too loud. He had to shove his way out through a very dense crowd of people. And as he passed through the crowd, he heard insults and threats to him and his family. When he got home, the crowd followed him and stood outside front of his house and chanted, enemy of the people, enemy of the people. His family inside was frightened. And then A rock flew through the window, sending shards of glass over the furniture and floor. At that, they turned off the lights and retreated to the upstairs bedroom and huddled together, their children crying. At that point, the doctor said, "We are going to pack now. And when the crowd leaves, no matter what time that is, we are leaving. And we're not only leaving our town, we're not only leaving our country, we are moving to a new country. We are going to America, where common sense reigns." That's the story.
That's a great story, Walt. Great
That's
story.
and well told. Well
Yes.
told.
Oh, thank you. So any suggestions about what movie I might be thinking of?
Well, the only thing I could think of was Erin Brockovich or whatever her name was, that with the water thing out in the desert.
That's number one, Erin Brockovich.
Yeah.
The second one that I was thinking of actually was Jaws,
Oh, yes.
because in Jaws, they had a public menace, and the city council and all that, they would not shut down the beaches because it would hurt business.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's a perfect analogy. That was great. Okay.
It really said that they were going to America. Is that what he said?
And that's in, yes, I didn't change that. They went to America because they figured they would, it was a country where people had common sense.
Well, maybe back
Freedom.
then. I'm not so sure about now.
But yeah, I see the parallels of some of the current events are compelling. The whole thing with the COVID, the parallels are kind of interesting. People wanting to kill doctors, Fauci. Yes.
Yeah, the kill the bearer of the bad news.
Right. It's an old tradition.
Yeah.
Good story choice for our time.
Yep.
Enemy of the people.
Hello there, Ron Evans. I see you joined us a little bit late. Glad to have you here. Do you have a story to share with us?
Yeah, I would give you the first part of a longer story.
Okay.
You up now? Or are you ready to?
Yeah, you can go ahead with your story. I just put the spotlight on you.
Oh. Well, you know the fact that I favor longer stories.
Well, we have a small group, so you know, I have a very short story.
Well, I'll give you the beginning of a story.
Okay.
It's it's not a once upon a time story, I think, but it's a story.
Well, would you rather be last and then you know how much, I mean, that there's nobody waiting to tell a story? We could do that.
Well, what I'll do is I'm not sure how long you've got, but I'll give you the first part.
Okay. And then if we want more after everybody else is done, do you want to add some more later?
There's always room for more, right?
Yeah.
Well, the story is Willard's hardware store, and one of the interesting things about Willard's hardware store is that it only exists in special places, and you have to have enough imagination to be one of those who understands the place. But you certainly would, if you're from New England, you would know something about the weather, which of course is very real. There's nothing imaginary about that. And the last Saturday in March was about as wet and woolly as you could get in Deep Harbor, Maine. Few people were seen in town. Most of them were hiding out in front of a television or close to a radio. They were tuned into the March Madness. I mean, Maine hasn't had a basketball contender for generations, but it's good to keep up with what's happening elsewhere, even if you don't know anybody there. So the snow that fell overnight was not, as the locals will certainly assure you, the last of the season. But now, this morning, it had just turned to rain, and it was all mush and damp and cold for everybody. And besides, there's still plenty left over from the time before, no matter if it takes a little bit of shoveling before breakfast. Mud season is never an end to winter in New England, and particularly in Maine. So better to stay inside in the warmth of thoughts about basketball than to be out in the cold and useless with a shovel any day. But none of this mattered, of course, to Sandy Willard. As you may know, he's the third generation down at Willard's hardware store, and the first Willard ever to finish college. Ever since graduating from Maine State, he's been nagging his father about changes that he wanted to make in the store. I guess almost having passed a course in business administration entitles you to do that. Sandy's father, Chris, held tight to his patriarchal rights as long as he could, but whining youth, especially in mud season, can take its toll on age. And it did. So Chris got worn down and relented. Now, at last, given the chance, Sandy got right to work on the thing that he'd been nagging his father that he wanted to do. He knew exactly what he wanted to do and how to do it. And he knew that he had to start with the big front window that's facing Main Street. Everyone passes Willard's window at least once a day. And so it's the right place to make a strong impression, don't you know? First, Sandy curtained off the window, thinking it would add to the surprise and allow him to work behind the curtain with some privacy. The curtain had been there for generations. They always closed the curtain on Sundays at Willard's because his grandfather, the founder, thought that it was just unseemly to have any thought about shopping on the Lord's Day. Deep Harbor folks are always ready with advice, and they feel an ancient and time-embedded responsibility to offer that advice. So Sandy felt all the more secure being out of sight behind the curtain. What he did back there was to remove more than 30 years accumulation of dusty merchandise that was on display or storage, if you like. I mean, out of the back of that window. Yeah, right there in plain sight, at least 6 days a week. From the time of his grandfather, it was never clear what was the best use of the window area, whether it was for display or for storage. But when Sandy's grandfather just thought, why not kill two birds with one stone? A good place to store things, and that gives people a little hint about what things we have available if they'd just dare to come right in. Well, it was not a bad thing, but it was a messy thing. And though people passed there every day and looked at it every day, they passed it and just never really saw it. But Sandy had a better use for that window. So the next thing he did was to wash the entire plate glass. Inside was easy, outside was tough, it being so cold and wet and all, but he did it. And then he mopped the floor area of the window twice. While all this dried, he drove over to Waldoboro, Maine, that's about 40 miles away, to pick up 2 items that he'd ordered from the people over there and had on reserve for some weeks back. This took the rest of the afternoon, but he was back soon enough, and After dusk and a lot more hard work again behind the curtain, his project was well on its way. Went to bed that night and got up early the Sunday morning. Again, the curtain was closed as usual, so nobody took any interest in that. And he was able to complete the task by midday. His project was finished early in the afternoon, and so all the better that he was behind that curtain. Folks thereabouts don't like to see anyone working while they're otherwise refreshing themselves at worship on a Sunday morning or entertaining themselves in front of the television on the Lord's Day afternoon watching basketball. But when at last the curtain opened, a startling result was revealed. All the old toasters, the garden hoses, bench tools, grass seed, step ladders, lawn mowers, the pushable ones, don't you know, dog dishes and dish towels and what have you were gone from that window. In their place stood a startling single item, a standing mannequin. It, or more to the point, she was dressed in a slightly used wedding gown. That's it. That's all that was in the window. The mannequin dressed in this clearly once used, maybe twice or three times used, wedding gown. Sandy got both of these staid mannequin and the vintage gown at the considerable savings, or so he thought, over in Walboro at the once upon a time nearly new secondhand store. The idea, of course, was the discreet sign noted just on the inside of the window over on the left was to announce that the hardware store was now a place where brides could register what with the wedding season coming on after all. Well, by lunchtime on Monday, everybody had heard about the window display. And by Tuesday supper time, most everybody had come downtown to see it. Most people didn't know what to think, but true to form, everyone had an opinion, and they stared at it readily. Another unfailing hallmark of Deep Harbor, Maine. The astonishing thing was, to Sandy's delight and to his father's complete surprise, by Friday, closing time that first week, 5 brides had indeed registered at the hardware store. And of course, this included Jenny Wells, whose marriage to Billy Kaczynski had not yet been formally announced, but it was being hastily arranged for reasons I don't want to go into in detail here. I can only tell you that Billy was at first as surprised as anybody else about the wedding. Rather recently, he'd begun to feel considerably patriotic and was about to run off and join the Navy. But Jenny's father and her 3 older brothers, all of whom are really quite athletic, stopped by one afternoon to have an intense heart-to-heart conversation with Billy. The subject, of course, was how to be a good husband and, in God's good time, a devoted father, too. But then, when Billy heard about the hardware store registration, he really got enthused. It seems that since the age of 7, he'd always wanted a nail gun. Well, I suppose that you probably already know that Smith Gardner and Margaret Wilson tend to have lunch together at Moody's Diner over on the Post Road most every Thursday. After their lunch that particular Thursday, Smith finished his last bite of banana cream pie and casually asked Margaret, would you like to go over and look at the window? That would be nice, Margaret said. So they climbed into his always well-washed pickup, and there was a good spot to park right in front of the hardware store, and they just sat there for a while and looked at the display. You probably know that Margaret is a Vietnam War widow. Her late husband, Charlie, was sent back home long since, but alas. And Smith, well, he was a dairyman, a retired dairyman. He had arthritis, and it was kind of tough to do what a dairyman in those days in that place used to do. I mean, to milk 38 Holsteins by hand is a lot of work. But now that he's retired, he, I think, has been thinking about other things that he might do with his time. And so as Margaret and Smith were looking at the window, long pause, and then out of nowhere, Smith said, "Never could quite understand the fuss some people want to make about weddings," he said. Margaret just sort of nodded her agreement, and both went on looking at the window a bit awkwardly. They just sat there. Now, to the best of my knowledge, that was the first time, and as explicitly as they had ever talked about it, that is, about getting married. And so if you want to know about the rest of the story and whether or not they did, and if they did, how they did, I guess we're just going to have to save that for another time, because that's the beginning, but hardly the end of the story. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ron. That was great. Definitely piques the interest. I think I've heard that story before. It's a great story.
A part of it you have.
Yeah. Okay, I have a very short story. Barbara, do you have a story tonight?
No, I do not have a story.
Barbara, really?
I do not.
Okay, my story is a folktale from India. And it actually includes a marriage of sorts. Jackal, who was recently married and lived close to the riverbank, agreed to supply his wife with a dinner of fish that night, even though he did not know how to swim. But he wanted to please his wife. It was a new marriage, and he certainly wanted everything to be amicable. So he crept down by the river and hid in the bushes and observed two otters fighting over a very large fish. And they were arguing about how to split up the fish. They had both worked at catching it. And one of them said, "Well, I'm the one who saw it first. I should get the largest piece." And the otter said, "Well, but I helped you when you went under and almost drowned, trying to carry it back to the bank. I think I should have the largest piece." And so at that point, Jackal decided to come out of the bushes and go down to the riverbank and offer his services as an arbiter. He suggested that they let him hear the arguments and decide what was the fairest way to split up that fish. And so the two otters agreed to let the jackal make the decision, and they would abide by whatever decision he made. So the jackal cut the fish into 3 pieces. He gave the head to one otter, the tail to the other otter, and the middle went to the judge. The otters had no choice. They had agreed to abide by the decision, and the jackal happily walked back towards home, saying, "Fighting always leads to losses." And that is the story.
Where did you find that story?
Well, I'm not going to hold the book up because, as Walt said, when you have a background, it doesn't help. But it's from a book called Peace Tales by Margaret Reed MacDonald. And it's the whole book is folk tales from around the world about solving conflicts and coming to peaceful agreements. It's an interesting book.
She has such an interesting way of presenting stories so that you can remember them well. It's almost like poetry. There's a line short, another short line,
Yeah.
and it all just clicks together, and it's much easier to remember. I don't know how she does that.
Yeah. You have some of her books too?
I do. And I've heard her give presentations before. I like her books better than her presentations.
Yeah, the other one that has books I like is Heather Forrest. She has great collections of tales.
But I always think of her music, and I can't do music, so I tend not to look for her tales, because if it doesn't have her music, I'm not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, I see. I don't have that background because I've never heard her perform.
Oh gosh,
I just have her books.
beautiful guitar and beautiful voice.
Yeah. Oh, I need to mention, and I'm going to do this, which I forgot to do, put the spotlight on me. I got an email from RD, or Dusty Sky,
Mhm.
and she wished to convey her greetings and salutations to the group. She still is having medical problems and didn't feel up to joining us, but she wanted me to pass on that she thinks of us and wanted me to say hi to everybody. And Walter and Ron probably don't know her, I would guess. Although she started attending the Zoom meetings early on, but hasn't been attending Zoom meetings for a long time.
I think I do remember her from one Zoom meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the name is an interesting one.
Yeah. Her performance name, Dusty Sky, is interesting, and her actual name is too. Well, I don't think Chris has a story for us. She had hoped to have one ready, but I don't think she does. Do you want to add a little more of the story you started, Ron?
No, John, I'll let it rest right there.
Okay.
Thank you for the invitation. No. Yeah.
All right. Now, I am curious, this is a small group, but there have been people who have been wanting us to go back to live meetings, and I wonder what the opinion is of people. Personally, I don't feel comfortable at meetings indoors with a large group of people, with the current Delta variant going rampant. But I wondered what other people feel.
Well, I'm having the same hesitations, John. Here at Pilgrim Place, we're still pretty well not totally confined, but many of our number are being very protective of themselves, and everybody's being very protective of each other.
Yeah.
And though many of us do go to church on Sunday or whatever, not everyone does, and we're still dependent upon the availability of Zoom, and it's boring, of course, in
Yeah.
many ways, but it allows us to be connected and associated with each other, not only across town, but across the country. And it has such advantages around the world, for that matter. But we too are very hesitant. Janet and I get out and walk most every day. We walk early in the morning and tend to walk in the evening when it's cooler. But we do not engage very much in public. People here, and there are 340 of us, and we can walk around and see each other, but we keep very great distance. And at the present time, we have been taking all of our meals at home. We come to a collection place and pick up our meals. As you know, we take one common meal a day, everyone. And those who are in assisted living then take 3 meals. But we would sit at tables, and the tables have been enlarged so that we have fewer people at a greater space. But for the last week or so, because we did have a minor outbreak, someone who'd been away and contracted COVID, and that brings a dangerous level for all of us. So for the past week or so, we have all been gathering food, bringing it back home, and the like. And I'm not sure how long that will continue, but we're being very safe. We were all tested on Wednesday a week. Was it Wednesday, Janet?
Yeah.
And everyone was negative, which is a positive thing to say.
Yes.
And we will be tested again this Saturday. But we have to have 2 weeks of everybody being positive before certain restrictions are lifted, some of which are, well, the major ones are imposed by the health department and the social service department, and not by our community, although the caring level in our community is astonishing, and we're all very pleased about that. But the restrictions are often imposed by the health department, who have our best interests at heart as well, and know that we are a vulnerable population, both by age and the fact that there are people who are infirmed and the like. So we're very vulnerable. So that's a longer answer to that. I think our tendency is to prefer Zoom when we can, rather than face to face as yet.
What about you, Walt?
I am still quite paranoid about being in public. I always wear my mask and I avoid any contact that I can. So yeah, I would not be comfortable. I just wouldn't go.
Yeah.
We've already had to turn down a wedding of a very close friend because of the risk of being in a large group of people at a wedding. And even when I visit my grandson every day, but because he's going to school, although they do have masks, they do have ventilation, they've got filters, they've got all these things and spacing and small class size, I still wear a mask when I'm close to him or indoors in their house, because both of his parents work. They both go out into the world and bring who knows what back.
Yeah.
But now, could I ask Ron a question? Yeah, I know you said there were 340 people at your assisted living facility.
Yes.
So I don't suppose, I actually know somebody who lives there, and I was just curious if you happen to have an acquaintance with her or by any chance. Her name is Ruth Mosebrook. Doesn't ring a bell.
Ruth
Mosebrook, yeah.
Well, she's not in independent living, I think. I'm surprised that I do not, because we know everybody.
Okay.
So the COVID lockdown has made it less easy to interact with people, because usually we meet
Right
at table and everybody is mixed up every day. I mean, we never know who your conversation partners are going to be. So I'm embarrassed that I do not know. No.
Well, I was just curious, and if you had, that would be a very cool thing. She's a very old friend of the family, so
Was she a resident here in Claremont beforehand?
Actually, Chino. They were our neighbors. They had a farm just south of us. I used to go to their vacation Bible school when I was a kid down in Chino. Right, feeding the cows through the fence during recess. Very old-fashioned kind of church with the steeple and the bell that they would pull and ring it. We'd all come in, all wood floors. It was very cool.
Oh, yeah. Well, it doesn't ring the proverbial bell for me. That's my fault.
Doesn't ring that bell.
Right.
I was just curious. Thank you for searching your memory.
Thank you, Walter.
That was a nice reminiscence that you gave. So
It was- Mhm.
I am too scared to be indoors with too many people. So I think we're with Zoom for a while longer, although I don't think we get as big a crowd, but
No, we don't.
because of the COVID, we might not get any crowd at all
Mhm,
in person.
mhm,
I'm happier staying on Zoom.
mhm.
Okay, well, of course, we're asking people who are here on Zoom, and then there may be some people who don't like Zoom and would come in person.
Yeah, yeah.
Ron Chick probably is one of them. Part of my hesitation, let me put myself on the spotlight. Part of my hesitation, and I don't think I knew this at the time last month, I had a friend die. Did I share this last month?
You did.
Yeah,
Not
It's
tonight.
haunted me thinking about it.
yeah. I don't think Walter was here last month, so he probably didn't hear it unless he listened to the recording. So a former hiking friend, I don't know that you ever hiked with him, Walter. His name was Fred Wilding. And he stopped hiking with me several years back when his vehicle got broken into at a trailhead. And he said, I'm not going on any more hikes. But excellent
Oh.
physical condition.
That's not the guy that had the wallet stolen.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I do know who he is.
Yeah, it was the
Yeah.
Frankish Peak hike.
Frankish Peak hike. Yes. We
That
had
was,
two break-ins on that same day.
yeah, Anne Sexton.
Annie got her truck broken into.
Right. Well, that's the guy.
Oh, no. Okay,
And
yes.
I didn't realize it, but he had leukemia. So he had an underlying condition.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it. He seemed to be in perfect physical condition to me. So the leukemia was definitely in remission. But his daughter was to have been married last year in England because she met this guy in England and moved there, and they were going to have a wedding. And it was canceled because of COVID. Well, they rescheduled it for this summer. So Fred and his wife traveled to England. They were both fully vaccinated. They got tested before, they got tested after arriving there. And they got there several weeks before the wedding to do some sightseeing. And both he and his wife contracted COVID, despite being fully vaccinated, which is kind of scary. And his wife was sick for a week, but he died. Because, well, he died of leukemia. The COVID apparently reactivated the leukemia. And talk about tragic. I mean, here they are in a foreign country, and his poor daughter's wedding. I mean, 2 hours before the wedding, they took him to the hospital, and he never came out. Died a couple days later. They went ahead with the wedding. He said, go ahead with the wedding, I'll be fine. Well, he wasn't. So that kind of haunts me. And, I don't have any underlying conditions that I know of, but I don't want to get sick. And Chris does. So, yeah, it's kind of disturbing.
I feel sorry for that family. Every time they have their anniversary, they're gonna have to celebrate his death. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is sad, very sad.
Well, John, I'm going to ring off, but I'm grateful that we are, whether small in number or not, but I'm
Yes,
grateful
yes.
that we can get together once in a while.
Yeah, we will continue to have the Zoom meetings. Of course, there's always there's also the other factor is that we currently don't have a place to meet because the Claremont Forum restructured, and I haven't heard from them yet that they've been able to create a space for us or anybody else to meet there for that matter. So it's a moot question, which I'm not really working hard to solve because of the whole COVID situation. Anyway, I am happy that we seem to have reached the peak with the Delta variant, and new cases are dropping and hospitalizations are dropping in California. And that is good news. Deaths are still going up, but that lags behind. So hopefully it will continue to improve, but it's something we don't really have much control over. So thank you all for coming. Great stories.
Thank you for making it happen.
You're very
Indeed.
welcome.
Thank you for that.
I've been taking notes. I'll get it to you eventually.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Barbara.
Good night, guys.
Good
Good
night.
night.